Hello, and welcome to what is turned out to be episode 21 of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast, covering all things Purdue sports. It has been a very long time since we have put out one of these, because it has been a very long time since I have been willing to sit down and record one. It turns out I think the last time I uploaded one of these was a very long time ago. We're talking almost a full calendar year ago, but we are back. We are very excited for another fantastic year of Purdue sports, and today we are going to be starting that, hopefully what will be a regular occurrence here at Boiler in Texas, trying to revive this podcast as best we can. But nonetheless, we are here to talk briefly about the 2022 Purdue football season, as well as take a brief look ahead at the Penn State football game here coming up actually tomorrow as the time of recording this. I actually managed to find some time to sit down and record this because boy does this week have me excited. I felt so excited, in fact, to try and revive a almost long dead podcast at this point, but we are very excited. We are coming up on game day. Purdue also just this morning released the new planned renderings for the first round of Ross-Ade Stadium renovations. We're going to touch on that briefly as well. But for now, let's go ahead and get started here on this new revival of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. And we are going to start today on talking about Purdue's 2022 season, kind of as a very high level. We're not going to go into too many details, mainly just because I feel like the time for that is long gone, and there are much better sources out there for the more detailed insights and the deep dives and everything. But I'm just here to provide at this point just a bit high level what my thoughts are going to be going into the season, and then we will move on and talk about the Penn State game. Once again, I'm not going to go into too much detail on that. I think we're all just very, very excited to get this season underway and to see what this team has in store for them. Coming off of a very exciting year in which Purdue wins 9 games for the first time in Lord knows how long. A very, very exciting game in the Music City Bowl against the Tennessee Volunteers, with a highly controversial ending to some, but a very exciting ending for others, mainly those in Boilermaker country. But nonetheless, it is going to set up probably one of the most anticipated Boiler football seasons that I can remember. And I, for one, cannot wait to see the opening kick tomorrow night in a packed out, blacked out Ross-Ade Stadium, and probably what will be a blacked out football team as well here in the home opener of this season. And it is going to be electric. It's going to be exciting. Unfortunately, I'm going to be sitting on my couch, not in West Lafayette, while taking the game in, mainly just because that's quite far away for me to get over there. But nonetheless, we are going to have a lot of fun, and I'm going to be very, very jealous of all the people who are able to make their way over there. But we said we were going to start talking about the 2022 season as a whole, bit high level. Thoughts, I think I'm just going to be mirroring probably a lot of what has already been said by others. But this season sets up to be a very, very high potential year for Purdue football. I mean, the schedule is not a murderer's row as we have want to see in the past. And this is probably the easiest schedule that Jeff Brom has had so far in his tenure here at Purdue. Obviously, opening the season with Penn State tomorrow on Thursday night in prime time is going to be the obvious more difficult outing at the beginning part of this season. But nonetheless, if we look past that at the non-conference schedule of Indiana State, Syracuse, and Florida Atlantic, obviously the trap game there, I believe, is obviously going to be Syracuse in the Carrier Dome, I believe it is. So Syracuse on the road is definitely going to be the trap game of all trap games here in terms of the non-conference schedule. That said, Syracuse has not been the same team as I believe they were when we initially scheduled them, so I am much less worried about the Orange than I might have been when this game was initially scheduled. And so looking at this out of conference, I would see no surprises if Purdue was managed to go undefeated here in the non-conference, and would absolutely set up a very fun night. Their first, probably besides the Penn State game, their first true test after the first beginning part of the season as they travel to Minnesota. They followed that up with a trip to Maryland, home versus Nebraska, away at Wisconsin, oh boy, home against Iowa, on the road against Illinois, home against Northwestern, and finishing the season down south in Bloomington against the Hoosiers of Indiana to wrap up the season, and what hopefully can turn out to be a very, very successful year in West Lafayette in terms of football. I think this has been talked about a lot by a lot of other sources, but this is a schedule that sets up for Purdue to probably be looking at 7 wins minimum. Anything I think less than 7 wins I think would be extremely disappointing in terms of potential for what the season could be. I think 8 wins is probably what people probably about expect, with the potential of, if things go extremely well, Purdue could be looking potentially all the way up to maybe even a 10-win regular season, which would be something that would be beyond probably most of our wildest dreams at this point. But nonetheless, the potential is there, and we are going to learn a lot tomorrow in the opening game against Penn State. I think this is going to be something to sort of either help expectations or hinder them one way or another. And I will point out here that I've seen some people talking about how a loss to Penn State really derails the season and really is just a huge missed opportunity. I don't think I'm looking at it that way at all. I think a win versus Penn State proves that Purdue as a potential 9 or 10 win team is extremely possible. I think a loss to Penn State in the opener would not derail the season. It does not automatically mean that the season is a failure. I think it just means that we're probably going to be airing more closer to the 8-win season than the 10-win season. And I definitely don't think that a poor show, we'll alter that statement to this. If Purdue shows out and competes with Penn State and loses, I don't think that's going to be a terrible thing. I think a win against Penn State just proves what kind of season could be possible. I think a blowout loss to Penn State at home in the season opener definitely will temper a lot of expectations, probably both in myself and others, that to a point that you really need to start questioning what this team actually looks like and if Jeff Brom can get it back on track. That said, I don't think it's going to be that way. I think it will go ahead and just, as we already are, we'll just move forward here and do our brief look at Penn State as a game. I think this is going to be a game of strength versus strength. I think Purdue's offense, obviously, I think is going to be very much the strength of this 2022 team, and Penn State's defense definitely will seem to carry them, as their offense has really struggled the last few years, it looks like at this point, to really be that same level of offense that we had seen also often, probably the late 2010s, that was out competing with Ohio State and Michigan and the likes, trying to competing for East Division titles. I think in the last 2 years they're 11-11. Definitely a lot of very underwhelming results coming out of Penn State. Obviously, we saw last year, and probably my favorite result of the season, as the 9 overtime game loss at home versus Illinois, which I found very entertaining to watch as a neutral fan. And so I think Penn State is eager to get back to the days where they were competing with Ohio State and not losing in 9 overtimes to Illinois. So I think they will look to come into West Lafayette and kind of make a statement, kind of riding the heels of their defense, hoping to stifle the Purdue offense that I think will be definitely the key component here to this football team. And so the big question for Purdue is going to be, can they get the stops they need to when they are on defense to kind of hold Penn State at bay? Because if this ends up turning into a offensive shootout, well, actually, an offensive shootout would be amazing to watch. But nonetheless, I would much rather Purdue's defense come out ready to play, really stifle the Penn State run game, which I think they're definitely going to try and establish, as they've really struggled here in recent years to really establish that sort of dominant run game that we've kind of seen from them. And then in the passing game, I think they definitely are going to have the athletic advantage. I don't know necessarily if they're going to have the full position advantage that they might have the last time that Purdue played Penn State. But nonetheless, if this turns into an offensive shootout, I think I like Purdue's chances playing at home. If this turns into a bit of a slugfest, it's really just going to be about who blinks first, and I think Penn State's players probably have a bit more expectations of not blinking first. So it would be an interesting result for sure, but we've definitely seen Purdue struggle in defensive struggles rather, And so I would much rather be an offensive shootout where Purdue gets to kind of stretch its legs on offense, much rather that than the opposite where it'll come down to the defense. So I think it's going to be a fantastic game. I think Ross-Ade is going to be packed. It's going to be electric, and I cannot wait to see the result. So I think that's probably about as much as I'll go into Penn State here. Being the day before, I think it's hard to be super objective, and I think we're all just kind of ready and excited to see opening kick. So taking it back to looking at the season as a whole, I think Purdue's biggest likely losses, or the biggest toss-ups at least, are going to be Penn State at Minnesota, mainly just because for whatever voodoo Jeff Brom has over Iowa and Kirk Ferentz, PJ Fleck has over Jeff Brom and this Purdue team, and playing in Minnesota is going to be very interesting, as it always is. We've seen some very interesting, questionable results from the Minneapolis games that we've played, especially on the road, and last year especially in a bit of an offensive struggle that we saw there at the beginning part of the season last year, where Purdue really struggled on offense. So I think Minnesota is probably more of a toss-up game than we'd like to admit. And then Maryland also could be an extremely interesting game, being in Maryland, and they're definitely a team that I think kind of was similar to Purdue at the beginning of the Jeff Brom era, or maybe that second season, where they really tried to focus in and rely on their offense to win them games. And so that could be a very fun game to watch, although it could also, when offensive shootouts like that, it could definitely get a little ugly one way or another very quickly. Other than that, Nebraska, I'm glad we're getting them at home. I think in Scott Frost, what could be Scott Frost last year in Lincoln, I think he'll be looking to make a point, especially against those teams in the division that they always seem to think they're better than, i.e. Purdue, even though Purdue has typically had their number here in the recent years. And then obviously there's the Wisconsin game, which I will never chalk up as a win, or I will always pencil it in as a loss until Purdue proves me otherwise. They have not beaten Wisconsin since 2003, and until that trend is discontinued, I will always count on that Wisconsin loss. Iowa comes to Ross-Ade Stadium in the first game of November. I think Purdue has a better offense than Iowa by far. In terms of defense, I think that'll be really a question of attrition at that point. We're getting kind of deep into the season at that point, and playing a pound it style offense and team like Iowa is could be completely and utterly dependent on health and reliability of the players available at that point. And who knows, Purdue could be playing for more at that point, which could be a big motivator, but that's a little deep in the season. We'll have to see. But Jeff Brom has proven once again here in the last couple of years that he has had Iowa's number, and they just cannot seem to adjust to the style of play that Purdue is playing under Jeff Brom. The following week, Purdue travels to Illinois. I don't suspect Illinois did look solid in their opening week 0 game against Wyoming. Whether that says much about Wyoming or more about Illinois, who really knows? We will find out with their first Big Ten game this coming weekend up against the Hoosiers to try and get a good measure of where they are. I know they are not expected to be very good, but we will have to wait and see. Northwestern got their first win over Nebraska in hilarious fashion in Dublin, Ireland, here in week 0. Although they are not considered to be good this year, they're not expected to be very high powered on either side of the ball, but they are expected to be very solid, as they always are want to be. And it is in fact even year Northwestern, so could we be seeing that surprise 9-win Northwestern team come out of nowhere, as ever is so wont to do every other year when the current year is divisible by 2 evenly? Whatever voodoo magic is going on there, we'll never know. But we get them at home, which I definitely enjoy. And then obviously we finish this season at Indiana. After the trouncing that we gave them last year, I don't really recall much of anything happening over the offseason that would lead me to believe that they're going to get that much better this season. So unless they just absolutely have a meteoric turnaround this year, it looks like they are on track actually to be the first FBS team to reach 700 losses as a program this year. I believe they only need 5 losses on the season before they reach that mark, and so I would happily be the ones, if Purdue was the ones, to push them over the edge in terms of that one. They have a fairly difficult season, obviously, playing in the East. They're I can speak, I promise. Their non-conference schedule is a bit mixed. They have their return game from Western Kentucky, which won their first game in a bit of a fun outing against Austin Peay. And then they also have to travel to Cincinnati, which I think could get a little ugly. And obviously they open the season with Illinois on Friday night. And so we'll learn a lot about Indiana, I think, in the first part of the season as well. So, but as of now, I do not foresee, Purdue losing to Indiana, especially after what we saw last year, and Purdue not really getting much worse on either end of the ball. And Indiana, I can't really tell seeing them getting much better on either end of the ball. So I think we can chalk that one up, hopefully, at this point, for a win for the good guys, who could potentially be playing for bowl seeding at that point rather than trying to get to a bowl, which is something that we have seen ever so often here in the Jeff Brom era. So if we kind of take a look at the for sure wins, I think Purdue gets is Indiana State. I'm penciling in Syracuse as a win. Florida Atlantic, that's 3. I think Purdue beats Maryland. I think Purdue beats Nebraska. I think Purdue beats Illinois, Northwestern, and Indiana. That's 8. In terms of toss-ups, I think you have Penn State, Minnesota, and Iowa. And we're penciling in a loss to Wisconsin because I am not ready to be that hurt again. So I think Purdue's looking at anywhere from 8 to 9 wins based on my count. I think I'll definitely rather round up to a nice 9-3 outing. The real question I think will come down to, is that good enough to compete in the Big Ten West? I think a win over Penn State in the opener would definitely help swing the pendulum more towards Purdue than not. I think the game in Minnesota is going to be a big one as well. And then Iowa at home could also be a big swinger. But who knows at this point? I think Purdue is going to be up there in terms of fighting for the West this year. I think if they can somehow manage to get off the Nebraska snide and try and finally get a win over the Badgers, granted it's in it's in Madison, so I definitely don't feel super confident in that, but nonetheless, it's going to be an interesting and fun year of Purdue football. I'm penciling them in at this point, like I said, a 9-3 record, with anything more being gravy and anything less, we'll have to take it on a situational basis, because it'll be an interesting one where, if Purdue goes 7-5 with wins over Penn State, Wisconsin, and Iowa, we'll throw Indiana in there too. Is that really a disappointing season? I think it's a successful season with maybe a bit of a disappointing statistical finish. But now if you're talking about losing to Penn State, Wisconsin, and like Syracuse on the road, Minnesota on the road, but you still beat Indiana, Northwestern, Illinois, Maryland, would it be a classic, Purdue beats who they should beat but lose to they're supposed to lose? Now Syracuse obviously is a little bit of an outlier there in that situation, but nonetheless it's going to be an interesting one. I think this year is going to be extremely fun. It's going to be a lot of fun to follow, kind of similar to, I think this is kind of one way, which may not be the best way to put it, is kind of like the gravy year that we built on last year. Purdue finishes the season 8-4 and then gets that thrilling win in the Music City Bowl to get to 9 for the first time in a very long time. I think this season is kind of a bit more of a question mark. We'll know they have a high-powered offense. We know their defense should be solid. The real question is, how high can they fly? And if not, minimum, we need to at least see a bowl game for sure. Anything less than that is going to be extremely worrying, which is also probably putting it as a bit of an understatement. But nonetheless, it's going to be a very, very fun year in West Lafayette. I'm excited to get it started tomorrow night under the lights against the Penn State Nittany Lions. And so from there, I do want to touch on the renovations that were released by the Purdue Athletic Department today, kind of taking a look at what was planned and talk about the general reaction from Purdue fans around the internet and kind of their initial gut reactions to the renderings that were put out that are on the renovations that are going to be starting post the Northwestern game, Purdue's last home game, and should be ready to go by the first game of the 2023 season next year. I think it's going to be a very fun time to see these changes coming to Ross-Ade Stadium. So nonetheless, we'll talk about it now. So their primary plans that were released involve a new pavilion style area enclosing the south end zone, replacing Morgantown, which is a big must ever since it went up. I'm surprised it lasted as long as it did, but at this point it's looking to be about a $45 million venture, which I think we've known for a little bit at this point. I think some people's expectations were not tempered as much, knowing the fact that it was only a $45 million effort. And I think people were remembering back to the, I think it was 2018 renderings that were put out, that Purdue put out basically as like a money's no object in a perfect situation. This is what we would love to do. Since then, Purdue has built a new football facility next to the outdoor practice fields, which I think kind of took over a lot of the roles that I think those larger complex renderings would have served. And so I think it wasn't necessarily necessary to do anything huge or major in terms of adding on to Ross-Ade as it currently stands. Another thing I would love to add is that some people seem hell-bent on thinking that this is the only changes that are going to be coming to Ross-Ade Stadium. This is just phase one. There will be more changes coming down the line. I'm hoping those changes will include changes to the existing structure of Ross-Ade. I think someone on Twitter brought up a good point that it could be fun to move towards, which I actually would love to as well. Kind of more of a split structure towards what would be, the east side of yourself. You're standing in the new south end zone pavilion, looking out the right section with the new full-time lights, turning that into a split level section, adding more seating above, kind of raising that right side of the stadium probably closer to matching the height of the press box on the west side of the stadium, as well as adding another big screen above the ribbon board on the north end zone to kind of even out the height difference on the two extremes there as well, especially now that the student section, and we'll move to this next part, is that the Ross-Ade Brigade is moving from their current position sort of on the northeast corner down to the new south end zone structure, as well as the right hand corner, typically reserved at this point for visiting fans of the existing Ross-Ade bleacher structure. I think this is probably one of the more hotly debated issues that we've seen online this morning, primarily just because I think people are feeling like these students are getting kind of pushed off towards out of the way. And I feel like people are thinking that this is going to be something that'll truly impact the students' impact on the game. I initially was kind of in that boat. I kind of worried that putting them in the end zone would really hinder their ability to impact the game. But at this point, I think I've come to terms with the fact that it's probably going to be more similar to its existing location than we think. The section of bleachers that are in the existing horseshoe shape reach the same point of the field, just on the opposite end. It reaches about, the current location reaches about the 30-yard line of the north end zone, and then stretches around the All-American Marching Band and sort of that northeast corner. I think this is essentially just putting them on the new additional seating that's gained by the south end zone project, as well as reaching the same point. It still reaches the 30-yard mark, but on the south end of the field. And so I think the impact on the visiting bench is going to be about the same. I think essentially it's just going to turn into, instead of making a huge difference on the north end zone, it's just going to change it to the south end zone. And this is really just going to put a bigger emphasis on the general admission crowd in the north side to really bring the noise and kind of influence the game on the other end. I'm also hoping that with the enclosure of the south end zone, sound will travel a little better from the students down the length of Ross-Ade, which could potentially help in these changes to probably where the most of the sound will come from. Not to bash the general admission fans much, but I think students definitely make the experience more than we're probably willing to admit at this point. And so I think people are worried about the worst case scenario, sticking the students down on one end and kind of alienating them from the other half of the stadium. Kind of similar, I think, in a perfect world, which I think would never work, but I love the way Mackey has the paint crew set up with the sections on either end. In a perfect world, I think that would be hilarious to see in a football setting, but I think at this point that's probably a little too much to ask. in the grand scheme of things. So that's a fun thought experiment, but I think it kind of highlights what people are afraid of. I think I personally am also afraid, thinking back to my flashing back to when I was a student there, from 2013 to 2017, basically the entirety of the Daryl Hazel era, and then out right before Jeff Brom comes in which, by the end of that era, we were talking about maybe a couple hundred students and maybe 15,000 fans in the stadium at any given point. So the idea of sticking a couple hundred students in the south end zone definitely won't do us any favors comparatively, but that's definitely probably a doomsday thought process more than anything, as the current direction of the program is much better off than it was when Hazel was in charge. Obviously, the trajectory of the program definitely warrants the additional student seating that this will bring. I think that's something else that's lost on this, is that all of the additional seating, not all of it, I guess I'll say there's that one little corner for the John Purdue Club section, but the majority of the new additional seating is going to add about 4,500 seats from what I've seen, are almost all going to be student seating. And so at this point, we're only increasing the amount of students who can show up, and I think it's going to ultimately be a great new foundation for future changes to Ross-Ade, which will come following at X date. I mean, they've come out and said that it's going to be donation based, and really that doesn't seem like the university is really going to be investing too much into it, and so it's going to come when it comes. But nonetheless, I think it's going to be a great new foundation for Purdue football, and I think people just need to calm down, kind of look at the bigger picture. And I know they were all very excited. The renderings they put out in 2018 were obviously pre-pandemic, and definitely aired more on the if money was no object side of things more than anything, because I think we all know how Purdue's athletic department functions. They definitely are more willing to invest now than anything, but at the same time, the university is also extremely hesitant to fund more of the athletic department than needed. And so I think that's why even these first round of renovations are more philanthropy based and donation based than anything. I believe all of the funds came from non-direct sources, and so this is something that really needed to temper everyone's expectations. I think everyone just had the pictures of those massive new Ross-Ade stadium vibes and those huge new structures that are just going to completely shape the future of that entire section of campus. And I think once it came out that this is going to be a sub $50 million renovation, especially when you look at the grand scheme of things, like $50 million is a lot of money, but in terms of football structures and athletic structures like that, it really isn't going to get you too much. And so I think this definitely fits, and considering the budget that we got, I think this is something that was extremely needed and definitely fits the bill of something to be excited about. I read a tweet, and I retweeted it earlier today, kind of saying that this is the correct take. But a tweet put out by Kyle Charters, and if you don't follow him, he's a fantastic follow for many sports, not just football. But he said, quote, "Purdue's mistake was releasing pipe dream renderings years ago for a project that wasn't going to happen and would cost $250 million in today's money. Today's release of a $45 million project looks solid, functional, at least in terms of movement and view, and is a huge upgrade." End quote. And so I think that's definitely something that kind of goes into what I was saying, that I think Purdue was very good to drum up excitement for potential Ross-Ade upgrades, but at the same time, I think they should have done more, could have done more to sort of temper expectations as we got closer and closer to these renderings and designs and decisions coming more to a reality. And so I think all in all, after working through my feelings on it and kind of looking at everything as a whole, I think this is something to be extremely excited about. We're finally getting rid of Morgantown in the tent, which was extremely small time, extremely small time. I feel like I almost threw up in my mouth thinking about it. Continuing on past this year, Purdue really needed to enclose the south end zone, add more seating back, really increase the total capacity of Ross-Ade back closer to what it was when the old south end zone bleachers, were still there before they tore those down for the smallest time. Little pavilion tent, beer tent was put in. And so I think all in all, it's a huge upgrade. I'm excited to see what the next phase of renovations go. I'm hoping it comes with more renovations to the rest of Ross-Ade, as well as potentially another big video board on the north end of the stadium, because especially now the students are going to be right underneath it, at least the ones who sit in the south end zone section, are going to be right in underneath the new biggest video board in the country, and so they're really not gonna have trouble seeing what's going on when the game is down on the north end of the stadium. So I think a video board on the opposite end of the stadium is definitely badly needed, as well as hopefully some new renovations to the current concourses, and we'll see. I have high hopes, and I know this athletic department has not really steered us wrong in the past ever since Babinski got here. So I'm going to stay here. I'm going to stay positive, and I'm going to continue to fight the good fight, hopefully online, spread some positive vibes, even though I was definitely one of those, not necessarily doomsayers this morning, but at the same time, I definitely was a little hesitant at the initial renderings. But ever since, the more I look at it, the more I agree that it's a good call. The new stadium tunnel for the team is no longer going to enter on the southeast corner. They are going to enter in a new tunnel, kind of where the existing Ross-Ade Brigade stands now. On the northeast end, it's going to be a tunnel directly closer to the locker room. I think that's going to be very cool. It's going to be very good. And now all we need is a revamp of Shout and a bit of a revamp on the existing late game media played by the university. But I think that is going to kind of do it for me here. I know this is a relatively short one, but I just wanted to cover a couple of briefly some things, my thoughts going into the season. We are only one night away here, at least as of recording this. So I'm hoping to do these more often. I kind of really fell out of practice last year from one reason or another. Life got busy again, especially in 2021, as life kind of outside of the pandemic kind of got bumped up again. And so I am going to try and do these more often, potentially also looking into hopefully potentially bringing more people on, getting more people involved, so it's not just me here talking to a camera, talking in a microphone by myself, which can get a little drony, I feel like, and being able to riff on people is definitely something I enjoy doing more than monologuing for 30 minutes. But for now, I'm excited for this football season. I hope you are too. I know you are too. Otherwise, why would you be here listening to a Purdue podcast released the day before the first game of the season? But I'm excited for this year. I'm excited to go on this journey with you all. And as always, you can find me on Twitter at Boiler in Texas, trying to spread as much positivity and vibes as much as we can as we venture into this next year of Purdue athletics. Also, wherever you're listening to this, go ahead and leave us a rating or a review of anything that you would like to see different. You could also just tweet me on Twitter. I'll probably see that first. But nonetheless, I appreciate you guys all. I think tomorrow night is going to be electric. It's going to be exciting, and I absolutely cannot wait to see Aiden O'Connell go out there, sling the football around, and have a great year for Purdue. That'll do it for us here on this brand new revival of the Runaway Train Sports Podcast. I will talk to you guys after the game, during the game, very excitedly or a little disappointedly. We'll figure it out along the way. But as always, Boiler up, hammer down, hail Purdue. Go Boilers.